we have today, starting on my left, which is only my left and no one else, is Doriel, who heads application development at NAV or NAV, NAV maybe, the huge Norwegian company, and she's joining us from an unlikely Norwegian beach looking weather. Then we have Nikki, one and only CEO and CTO of Open Credo, Paul, who leads engineering at Uswitch, and Manuel, the birthday boy, who is obviously the author of Team Topologies. And that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about Team Topology, which has been around for 5 years, which is quite crazy for all of us that have been at least mentioning or linking to it for the last 3 or 4. It's definitely been a journey, and I think it's inspired a lot of people and a lot of the conversations in the industry and the cloud native DevOps platform engineering space. So really excited to be doing this with all of you. And let's dive in. And I actually want to start with you, Manuel, the birthday boy. What are your thoughts? Did you think 5 years ago when you were writing this that it would become such a thing that you'd be hosting a conversation 5 years later to talk about the impact that it had on the industry?
Hi, can you hear me? Everything working well? Yeah, because my connection just dropped like for a minute, and I was like, great.
No, you're good. You're good.
Starting. Also, really cool to see people from all over the world, except I think Australia and that area of the world because they're asleep. So it's really cool to see all the people joining. So yeah, you can see like the book in the background. Even last year, it was like we were actually together, me and Matthew and a few of the people in sort of the core team celebrating 4 years of Team Topologies. It's actually September 19th, I think, the official release date.
We're cheating that.
So we're a bit ahead, but it's good to start early celebrations. And to answer your question, to be totally honest, we didn't expect this sort of success or visibility of the book, and still sort of going strong 5 years later. We definitely thought that there was an audience more around people in management positions and leadership and kind of senior engineering, and that's partially why we published the book with IT Revolution, because they also it's the publisher from Gene Keem, and they also organized the DevOps Enterprise Summit conferences, which now have been renamed to Enterprise Leadership. But that was sort of our target audience. But I cannot say that I expected this kind of reach 5 years later, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, hard to predict this type of things. Cool. So, I mean, I'd like to hear from everyone else here. What was your first touch point with Team Topologies? When did you first pick it up? When did you first read it? What impact did it have on your work and just kind of like how you were thinking about things? And maybe we can start with you, Nikki.
Sure, yeah. So I can't remember exactly, if I'm honest, when I picked it up in terms of the, my birth date of reading Team Topologies. But it was sort of early on, I think, in the sort of 20s and things, and probably about in the 2020 somewhere, sort of around there. But I'd seen a lot of the sort of work that was going on that Manuel had on the I think it was DevOps Topologies was one of the original sort of websites.
Yes.
I've kind of seen some of that, and that really resonated with me, and a lot of that obviously kind of made it into the book. So I kind of had a bit of an early insight, I guess, from that perspective. And then when the book came along, it really kind of fleshed everything out a bit more sort of fully. So yeah, so I guess it was a bit of a combination for me of the website first, and then kind of reading the book after that, and that really kind of fleshing it out.
Tori, what about you?
Like Nikki, I don't remember the first touch point, but we were quite early, Manuel, because we were on your course in I think it was in November in Berlin, me and a colleague going on probably one of your first or early courses, at least.
I think it was the first one. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. It also resonated with us. So we had getting Matthew coming over to Norway, and then we had a course in Norway with him for the entire leader group for the IT department, and also on our festival where we had a lot of topics, and Matthew was speaking, and also had a course for some of our senior developers also. So we saw the value early and invited Matthew over.
Nice. Paul?
Yeah, hi everyone. So actually Manuel and Matthew emailed me after I'd written an article. I was going to be presenting at a conference, and then I wanted to write it out beforehand. So I wrote the long form article before giving a presentation, and then posted it. And then it was about some of the things we had done within the infrastructure parts of the business to try and get some of the complexity under control. We'd seen teams getting snowed under with the growth and complexity of Amazon and things like that. And so I'd written this big article about how we had used Kubernetes to try and control that, what we were doing, some of the results we'd seen, and then had an email saying like, we're doing some research into this. Do you mind if we, link to the article or something a bit like that? And I was like, yeah, that's amazing. That'd be great. I don't think I realized quite how comprehensive the book would be. So I don't know if I just assumed it was going to be focused on platforms or infrastructure or something, but was very pleasantly surprised afterwards when I bought the copy. And then it felt like it was, you're kind of reading things going like, yes, of course, like that's the thing that I wish I had a way of describing, or the kind of spidey senses you've been leaning on for a long time. And so I was mostly appreciative of somebody else having already done the hard work, and then I could just give people a copy of the book and say, can you go read this for a little bit, and then we can pick up the conversation.
It's kind of funny because, like, for me, I feel like you all are doing the hard work, and that's the cool thing of having you in this panel. Not just that you were some of the early adopters, but like actually the hard part is taking these ideas and these patterns and what have you, and actually applying and sort of navigating your own organization's challenges and politics. And Nikki, I know you do that with your own clients of different organizations. So I really appreciate and I know, and I've been there as well, how difficult that can be. And with Paul, it was actually quite funny because I think sort of in parallel, we didn't know each other at all, nor Matthew knew you. And we wrote the book, and then we came across your article that you mentioned, and I was like blown away, because that's exactly the things we're talking about applied in practice at Uswitch, where you were CTO at the time. And then I think we met at QCon London, and I gave you a copy of the book, which was probably the first time you even saw the book. But we had been chatting about what did you do, especially in the platform approach. And to this day, we have an industry example on the website, and to this day, I refer to that because it's such a very so strongly aligned with what we were talking about. Okay, platform should address cognitive load concerns. First of all, how do you actually start a platform in a way that is sustainable, that you focus on who are the first customers, so that you are really providing value, and then you can build on top of that. So it was really, really cool to see that, how in parallel you were applying the ideas that we were writing about without knowing, sort of.
And what would you say were kind of the main obstacles of implementing these ideas, right? Because as you said, Manuel, the idea is obviously it's great, but the hard work is actually making it, applying it on an org transformation level, right? So I don't know, what was it for you, Tyrell?
Well, it's a lot of things, because as you said, there is strong culture, and it's several layers of an organization that needs to apply the principle or understand the thoughts about it. So, but we had started building our internal developer platform, and we had some people thinking a lot of the same thoughts, but I think that helped us on the way to really set up how we could make the product teams get their flow. Yeah.
Paul, what was it? What else did you encounter?
Well, I think so if I think back to the kind of infrastructure work we were doing in 2018, the kind of the position the organization was in, right, was that we'd kind of grown up with Amazon. So we were quite like, so when we acquired Uswitch, which was like 2010, it was a, physically hosted on-premise server. There was an ops team that managed the infrastructure. It was slow getting things built. Like it was just, very, as you would expect of an organization, kind of created in the early 2000s. We had got into using Amazon through doing some machine learning stuff. And we knew that was going to be, we knew that it was going to be quicker for us to build on Amazon directly and just have the dev teams work, running their own infrastructure. And so over the years, we just kind of built our own Amazon infrastructure, and it was we leant hard on the spectrum of like decentralized, like push as much decision making to people as possible. So there was no shared libraries, there was like the only shared stuff was there was a handful of like Puppet config that some people would copy between. There were like make files that some teams would copy between each other to like spin up and tear down infrastructure, but it was literally like the sharing was copy and paste. And so actually the thing that was hardest was trying to convince people that they should let that go. Teams were used to managing things on their own. They kind of liked that they understood how everything works. They liked that they kind of knew the quirks. So even if there was things that they found hard, they preferred the idea that it was hard, but they knew it and they created it. So I think that was at the time, that was probably the thing that was hardest, was convincing people like, you don't worry about that, use this other thing instead. We had to do a bunch of work around SLOs. Actually were super helpful at the time for kind of formalizing the service provision on the platform, so that there was a shared agreement on like, how fast should it be, or like what's the latency of the request coming through the system, etc. So there was some of that stuff that we had to do, but really the I guess the kind of thematic bit was people didn't want to let go of the things that they had built over the years, and gradually you had to kind of eke away at it. But you just had to keep powering through. But that was probably the hardest bit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's super interesting, right? Because like, I don't know, in your experience, Nikki, like how important is this like internal marketing of the platform, right, throughout? Because I feel like so often teams are very concerned with kind of like the technical challenges and like, oh, if we don't pick the right stack, we're gonna fail. But it's almost never about like which stack you pick, and actually about like, how well can you align the different stakeholder groups internally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so as a consultancy, we've kind of seen quite a few different organizations and different types of platforms. And one of the biggest challenges often is trying to get people to see that broader community, and that it's not just about the technology, but actually you've got developers, but you've also got, operations, you've got security, you've got a whole broader set of people to actually kind of look at. So so I'd say in the first instance, one of the obstacles that we find was actually getting C-level to buy into it. So quite often when we would come into organizations, you'd kind of start in some way at the technical sort of level, because that's where you were brought in. You say, well, this is great. Yes, there are certain things we need to do, but actually the problem is much bigger than that. We need to look broader, and part of that is around looking at team structures and things like that. So then actually having to sort of go up to make sure that you get buy-in right from the C-level is quite challenging sometimes, depending on where you engage. So nowadays, I think there's a lot more sort of recognition that you need, different sort of people and types of sort of groups and things that you're targeting. But that was definitely, I think, and still is, I think, for many people, the sort of challenge around that. But yeah, getting people not to focus on the technology and to look beyond that to the teams is often one of the hardest things that we find when we go into companies, because everybody just wants to play with Kubernetes and all of the, you know, all the twiddle with all of the bits and pieces, and that's not really the thing that will get you the fast flow that will actually get you to the end faster. So
yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Manuel? Like, I mean, of all the people that you've spoken to, Tori's back. Of all the people you've spoken to that you know, have implemented team topologies and have tried to follow your approach, like, what were kind of, you know, this challenges, and was it mostly on the cultural side of things, and you know, how have things changed, right, in the last 5 years?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that what Nikki described is exactly why we wrote the book when we were doing consulting for DevOps,
and it's
continuous
very
delivery.
helpful, Manuel, to take the book.
Yes. So I can tell you, after 5 years, that's only the first step. It doesn't get you all the way to magical change in the organization. But basically, we were facing the same thing. That, you know, organizations wanted help with their practices and technology, and that's all helpful, but then you encounter sort of bigger problems around how teams interact or don't interact, and clarity or lack of clarity on responsibilities, Conway's law, all these things. What I can say sort of 5 years later is that broadly adopting the ideas in team topologies obviously requires some level of or you know, a great level of leadership buy-in to that, as well as bottom up. So that's kind of the key challenge, because there are some changes, and we're talking about, you know, structural changes and or you know, aligning to different types of teams, clarifying responsibilities, and sometimes or often trying to reduce the scope of responsibilities of teams because they're overloaded. There's too much cognitive load. There are too many stakeholders. Usually, maybe the team is too big, and so it's hard to get a good dynamic even inside the team because they're just too big. All these problems obviously will at some point require leadership to sort of intervene and help evolve the organization. At the same time, you cannot do that effectively if people on the ground don't understand why are we, you know, if you present it as yet another reorganization or yet another transformation, they've been burned in the past usually. And so they'll be like, okay, why are we doing this again? So you need some level of understanding on the ground as well. Like, why do we need this platform as a product approach, for example? Why do we need to have streamlined teams? Why should we have very, you know, intentional ways of interacting with other teams? So it requires a combination, you know, bottom up and top down kind of approach and understanding to be really effective. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that, and I think partially the success of the book, in my view, is because there's a lot you can take and apply in your own teams, even if you're an individual contributor or you're an agile coach, things that you can apply tomorrow if you read the book today, right? So things like team API, or, you know, being more intentional about your interactions with other teams, but to be, you know, to adopt more kind of broadly the team topologies, and obviously to get the value of fast flow and clarity and shared language, all these things, you need that combination of top down and bottom up. And the other great challenge that I want to mention is we still see this idea that not just team topologies, but that organizational design is just about kind of fixed structures. Like, if we get the right teams, if we get the right org chart, that everything will be much better. There's still a lot of this sort of naive view of how organizations really evolve. And so even people read Team Topologies and they come to us and they say, well, we need to do a reorg in 6 weeks. That's like, sorry, that's not, I can already tell you that's not gonna get you very, very far, because it's, what you need is to change into a more continuous evolution of the organization, which is a much more dynamic thing, right? And you need to get ways to identify where things are not working well, which, you know, interactions maybe that we're lacking, so that we can evolve and basically have as many people aware that this is a continuous thing. There's no ideal work chart or even operating model. It's just, it needs to continuously evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think this like iteration, like you really want to build a system that is able to iterate, right? Versus like something like, hey, this is the best possible system, because there's no such thing, right? I mean, Toriel, like as our in-house, you know, enterprise platform engineer, what would you, you know, I guess like on this iteration angle, if you were to start again, or you know, if somebody here in the audience is starting now on their platform journey, you know, what would you, in your case, do differently, or what would you advise? You know, that hey, this is how you build a team or a system that can scale and then can iterate quickly, and that can build these internal feedback loops with the different types of the organization, the different stakeholders, you know, in a way that my platform initiative is actually resilient, and I don't either end up building something that nobody uses or that it's not needed, or something that is not ultimately 10x better than the existing kind of developer experience, which then also, you know, makes it hard for the platform to actually be successful.
Yeah, I think first of all, you need platform developers with strong technical skills on a broad level. And, I'm not sure if you said that I was a platform engineer. I'm not. Just disclaimer. Am I falling out?
Yeah, Toriel, we can't. Wait, I think you're back now. Try again.
I can try again. But I think you need, as I said, somebody with strong technical skills, but also people that have a vision of what they want to build with their platform. For our application or platform, we had people that were, you know, very focused on the self-service part of it as a service, and never wanted to step away from that for the customer. So everything should be on the self-service. And internal, they had a lot of focus on to automate their stuff. So they need to have good skills on the infrastructure part, the platform, the network, and the risk is sometimes when you build a platform that they are very eager to please. They try to make the platform as easy to use, so that the teams want to use it, and it's the golden path they're building.
Absolutely. And on that, how, you know, because like we speak a lot about golden paths, you know, in the kind of the platform engineering space. But you know, what is the, in your opinion, Paul, like what is the right level? Like how do you design this golden path, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about like finding a compromise between how much you obstruct the complexity underneath, right? But also at the same time, how much this golden path doesn't become a golden cage, and you're actually providing the right level of context to developers, right? So how do you think about that trade-off?
That is a great question. I'm not I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer it, because I think we bias very heavily towards not defining or describing a golden path. And actually, to be honest, I think probably to the point, I think we tried a few times to do it, but we never really quite managed to actually put it in action. And so I guess what we actually do is, there's a core set of like APIs and infrastructure that teams are productive on using, but there is no stipulation that that's the thing that people have to use. So in general, in practice, what that means is like when people are starting stuff new, there will often be a debate about like, should we be using, Google Cloud Run, or like, should we just use the internal infrastructure? And in general, it comes down to the internal infrastructure already ticks the boxes on, access control, audits, the kind of audit constraints, the automation hookup with all of the other kind of tool set and stuff. And so it's kind of described through the APIs and the living systems that we have, as opposed to a piece of documentation that says like, here's the expected set of stuff that people use. But yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer. I think to be honest, I think some of the reason for that is I used to work for a consulting firm in the early 2000s. A lot of my time was spent inside investment banks in London, where it was like the entirely the other end of the spectrum, right? Where like you could only use JUnit. There was no other option for any form of like unit testing library aside from JUnit. And so I remember that being kind of overly constraining. And so when I left that company and then joined this one of the things I think informed the culture was like, we're not going to do that. We'll focus on like speed of change, autonomy, decentralized control, etc. And so I think we swung very hard in the other direction. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but we're down one end of the spectrum. I'm not sure that's necessarily where I think we should be.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because I actually saw that Caio asked basically this question. I haven't even seen it, and I've seen that Matthew is actually responding in the chat. So maybe Manuel, maybe you can also jump on this one, right? Like how to strike the balance. Matthew has brought in the concept of a thinnest viable platform. So maybe you can bring that in too.
Yeah, so actually, I think what you were describing, Paul, is to me actually is a good fit to sort of a Pave path, and maybe here where it's more about kind of the language we're using. But it sounds like if you have a platform that provides ways to simplify certain tasks and sort of has value intrinsically that people look at it and say, okay, yes, if we use this, we'll get access control and the other benefits you already said, so we don't have to worry about it. That's what I would call, a Pave path. I think I personally not a big fan of the golden path, just those words, because it makes it sound like, oh yes, what we built in the platform is the ideal thing that everyone should use. And actually, I think it's healthier even for the technology organization if you look at the platform and you are, reasonably skeptical and be like, hey, is this actually going to help or not? Do we need to do something differently? From the point of view of the product teams or StreamLM teams, if you use Team Topologies. But going back to the question, what I usually recommend is to think about who is your audience. I think that's the starting point for me, is like your audience in the organization. From all the teams that could potentially use what we're building in the platform, get a good understanding of that. Obviously, that changes with scale if you're talking about a few teams or you're talking about dozens or even hundreds of teams. But try to get a picture of, at a high level, who are these teams? What kind of experience, expectations? What is the technical stack they work on? So that you can actually make better choices for what you're building in the platform. And where possible, if you're not just like Torley was saying, not just gold plating, but sometimes it makes sense to provide different entry points to the same type of platform service, right? Where, especially in big organizations, you might have teams that are very kind of junior, or they're working on something that they really want to have that paved path. Just give me something as simple as possible to use. Maybe there's an even a UI and something that I can get started easily. And you might have other teams that are more senior or have more specific needs that they need to have more fine-grained control over that kind of service that you're providing, whatever that is. Maybe it's monitoring or infrastructure, whatever it might be. And so, but if you don't know who the audience is, which teams do we have in the organization, what are the things they need to do, and how can we help them, then you're more likely to build too much or too little, or invest too much in what you're doing. But definitely that's one of the hard challenges of doing platform as a product. Like, what do we invest on and build and provide more options versus what do we keep to the minimum and let teams figure out what else they need on top of that. Because and just to add to that, I would say a common anti-pattern I see is, which relates a little bit, so almost the opposite of what Paul was saying before, where teams that you switch because they knew the stuff that they were doing and they sort of didn't want to relish, they didn't want to give away the control to sort of the platform. There's sort of the opposite anti-pattern where many teams will be like, okay, we need X, but that should be the platform responsibility. So we're just going to wait for them to build it or provide it. And the platform teams usually overloaded as well. So maybe they are not prioritizing the thing that you need, and that should be okay. It shouldn't be that we're just pushing responsibility to the platform. If it's something we need as a product team, sometimes we need to take responsibility. This is sort of a fish type of thing, right?
Nikki, you want to jump in?
Yeah, as I was just going to sort of say on that, one of the things that we found is, as you say, knowing your audience, I think is quite key.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, in one way, anti-patterns, I think, is that sometimes people, as you say, they want to build something that covers absolutely everybody. But what we found is that there are some problems, there are some sort of things that maybe 80% of the people are really kind of struggling with. And if you build you build sort of functionality and sort of paved paths, whatever, around that, you can actually massively improve the majority of the organization. There's still going to be 20% or something that they need to do their own things and they've got to sort of veer off on a different path. But by concentrating on, like, it's not quite the 80-20 rule, but that's what I kind of call it in this case, is that you focus on the main, the 80% that you can really help, and actually by building something for them that is maybe more simple and sort of really customized for them, it can massively improve the flow. But then the other 20% or whatever the percentage is in different organizations, they can deviate, they can do their own thing if they need to. So so knowing your audience, but also not trying to actually tackle absolutely everything and shoehorn everybody into one way of doing things is something that we found is quite helpful.
Maybe it's the can't make everyone happy rule. Yeah, I mean, this is also, I think, begs another interesting question, which is kind of related to another question that Caio put in the Q&A, which is basically, where do you start from, right? Like, you have an heterogeneous organization where you have more advanced teams, less advanced teams, right? Like, where do you start, kind of like building that feedback loop and building and shipping the platform? Paul, you want to go first?
I think there's a couple of answers. I don't think there's like one right way to do it. I think some of it is going to be like focus on where, like, find where the heat is, right? So like fix the parts of the org that the CEO or the business cares most about. I think the challenge is, like, if you do that and you don't have engagement from the team, it's going to be very difficult to get that started. So I think when we got involved, when we first started, the thing that unlocked it was there was a very small team that ran all the services and the app that was part of the business at the time. It was a team of like 3 engineers. Like, it was a very, very small team, and like they'd had some outage overnight caused by a machine not having the log rotation rules set up properly. That meant that the disk got filled and it broke out overnight. And so in the end, it was a thing where it was a bit of a clanger. It had hit the business, and it was like, all right, well, look, we know that this team have got a challenge with keeping up with everything that they need to do. So like, let's go sit with that team and figure out what we can do to onboard their services, and we can take away some of the pain. And I think that worked really well because they were very engaged in, like, they didn't want the infrastructure problem. They wanted to focus on the app. And so there was none of the arguing over, I don't believe that this system is the right way to build it. It was just, they just needed something to solve their problem. And so that, I think, was a relatively low friction way of getting started. It was probably not the bit that had the most heat. Like, that was probably not the thing that made the most money in the company, but it was definitely a bit that we knew that the team was constrained and small. They didn't want the infrastructure problem. They wanted to focus on end users instead. And we knew that there was a way to get some help. And the fact there was only like 2 or 3 people, you could literally just go and take your laptop, sit at their desk, and then start working through it with people. There was no great web of politicking that you had to deal with. So I would say start with where the engagement is. Even better if you can find one where there's high engagement and it's also it's got some heat that people care about.
Mm-hmm. So high engagement, high pain, you would say?
Yeah, I think the engagement's probably the larger factor on it, because I think if you don't have the engagement, it's going to be very difficult to get feedback on if it's working or not.
Right.
And I think you're going to make your life a lot harder. So I would go with where the engagement is if you can, but if not, probably lean on where's the largest pain? Where do people care about the most?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very interesting. What about you, Toriel? Like, have you followed some framework in terms of like a rollout strategy, and also, like, kind of attached to that, like, I think high pain, high engagement, all these things are great, but also how do you sort of, from a first iteration, how do you grow after that, right? So how do you, like, is it you track a certain set of metrics and you show how the platform has helped improving that to kind of like, make the case for the platform to expand then to the next team? Or how do you, design that kind of rollout? Or how you think about that, the adoption?
I think it's like several people now have mentioned, it's about what the user needs and where there is most pain, and how do you find the topics that gives most value, and you invest in that. And yes, I'm not sure about a rollout plan, because I haven't been, with the team when we have made or when they have built up an application platform. But I think
are there metrics that you look at, or that are important?
We have metrics, but I think if you're about to do it, I think it's smart to invest in search of what's out there and how other people has done it, and also reuse. For instance, our platform has been reused of other public offices in Norway. So do a lot of investment on what you want and what is the vision that you want to achieve, and then take it step by step.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. This leveraging existing standards, right? Like, I mean, have you seen, Manuel, like, new, sort of like standards coming out, or like, kind of like blueprints or ways or frameworks that multiple companies, multiple platform initiatives have started adopting in terms of like, hey, this is what best practice can look like, and so to drive the conversation?
I know there's the CNCF Platform maturity model. I'm not sure if Nikki, you were involved, or you, right? So maybe you can talk about that. I think that's the thing that comes to mind first.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe just a little bit on that. So the CNCF platform maturity model that got released in November, I was involved in some of the pre-CNCF
I saw a very early version, yes.
Yeah, the initial sort of versions, because that's part of, in one way, when we go into clients as well, is to understand, like, where are you starting from, and what are you trying to achieve, and what are the steps that you need to sort of get there. And it is a journey, it's an evolution. So being able to understand and sort of plot yourself on, whether it's those axes or there might be a few other sort of axes, but just having an idea of, where are you in terms of adoption, where are you in terms of your operational capability, will allow you to understand what are the sort of strategies, what are the steps to get to maybe where you believe you need to go in order to scale. So for me, I think that having an understanding of where you are and what you're trying to achieve will be able to plot, some of that for you. And I guess one of the other things we've just found is really helpful is that to take something all the way through to production. So as people have said before, is not just, try and get 20 teams and you all go to staging, but you don't actually take the sort of functionality through to production, because we've seen that you don't get those feedback loops if you only go halfway. You need to take it sort of all the way through so people can then work out, what are my operational challenges? What are those type of problems? And if you don't do that early on, you don't get those feedback loops. So trying to find one team or two team that ideally are, they're going to promote, they're going to help you, and they're going to promote it and take it all the way through and loop around a little bit on that, gives you initially good ways of getting some of that feedback, and then you can start scaling in other teams after that. Because I think inevitably in the first instance, there is some qualitative feedback that you get back, where people, they tell you whether they think it's better, and it's not as quantitative in some aspects for the first or the initial ones. But then, as people go along, it's like, actually, this is significant better. And then you can ask more quantitative questions, I think, going forward as well. So I think there's an evolution of, getting a feel for it, but then moving into more quantitative stuff as well as you move forward.
I think that fits quite well if you think about the adoption life cycle as well. So if you're bringing something new into the platform, or you're starting a platform, it's sort of related to understanding the audience. But if you know the adoption life cycle, where you have early adopters and innovators, those are the people who, and the teams, will likely be more tolerant to the faults that the platform will inevitably have in the beginning. And those people, I think, like you're saying, Nikki, that can actually give you the most qualitative feedback for you to improve the early stages of the platform. And then when you start to see more adoption, and you see, well, we're getting 20% of teams, or 30%, 40%, then you start to have to focus on other things. So you might need to, we need to make this thing more reliable. We need to cover more use cases. We need to, maybe, like I said, offer different entry points or different abstractions to the same thing to actually get more adoption throughout the organization. So and I agree with what Paul said earlier as well. There's no single strategy to sort of grow your platform. The thing that I've realized more and more over the last 5 years is two aspects that you should keep top of mind when you're working the platform is trust and visibility. And the trust factor is actually can guide a lot of decisions. Obviously, there's the aspect of reducing cognitive load and helping teams that have the most pain. But it's also building trust. So to give an example, I was helping a large retailer company, and they basically had all this budget approved to build new platform services, but they already had this commitment to deliver this service and that functionality. And it was like, talking to them, we were like, do the product teams even understand why this thing you were planning to build would be helpful for them? Do they understand the domain of the thing you're talking about? which is, can be observability, continuous delivery, all these things. They have their own sort of complexity, and people need to understand, why is this helpful for us? And so if you think from a trust perspective, actually, in that case, it was better to spend some time initially helping teams learn more about these domains and just help them get started with small things, get a deployment pipeline running, or get, a little bit of more insight into your application in runtime and things like that, where it's, before you even build something, just make the connection to the teams, and that improves the trust. So when you actually build something in the platform, they will be more likely to adopt it. And then also the visibility part, which refers in my mind a bit to the metrics that you mentioned, Luca. Like, you might be trying to build a platform, to improve for example, the DORA metrics for the product teams. You want to help teams be able to deploy more often with shorter lead times, all these kind of things. But you need to understand there are other stakeholders that are maybe making decisions even on the budget for the platform. So you need to understand their point of view as well. And so if they're, obviously today, many organizations are looking at controlling costs and being more fine-grained about where we're spending the budget. And so you need to cater, for example, for those perspectives as well. Like, what are we spending in the platform? Why are we doing this versus that? And show that visibility, understand that other stakeholders need to have visibility into the platform as well, even if they're not the users of the services.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have 10 minutes or so. So I want to kind of bring it back a little bit to Team Topologies. We have a couple of points here in the chat that are quite interesting. So from Chris and Jason on kind of, I guess, like paraphrasing here, but like, what is the ideal size for an organization to apply the concepts of Team Topologies, which I think, in other words, is also what is the ideal org size for a platform engineering initiative? Nikki, you wanna take that first and then go around the horn?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string? I think is that one. I think so. I think sometimes when people start out, if you're starting out, sort of small type thing, I don't think you want to start out with a whole sort of platform engineering initiative. Quite often teams will start out, in a startup mode, and you can get away with your 10, 15 kind of people just working in a without having, a specific platform team. And I think sometimes as people scale, then it kind of gets to the point where suddenly you start having more teams and the coordination and the challenges become bigger. So I don't know that there's necessarily a particular one size that you automatically, say, well, this is the right time to, sort of split into having different team topologies and a platform team. But I would say when it starts getting to the point where you've got multiple teams that are doing the same thing, and they're sort of they're reinventing the wheel quite often, it's like an indication that actually this is probably a moment where we need to start, sort of consolidating. So I think sometimes I'd kind of look for those signals rather than, oh, there's 20 people or there's, X number of whatever teams type things. So that's generally one of the signals that, I think to kind of look out for is, are people, reinventing the wheel and doing the same thing in multiple sort of places is generally one of the challenges. And also, I think one of the things that we've found from organizations is that one of the challenges that the C-levels find is that they can't find enough skills. So it's like, I can't put enough platform engineers in every single sort of team. I've got 20 teams or I've got 10 teams, and so I need to consolidate my resources. And so that also becomes one of the the driving factors to try and consolidate more. So I think there's technical reasons, there's organizational reasons, and you kind of have to have a look at a few of those different factors to see what makes sense for you. So yeah, maybe that's a bit of a politician's answer, but yeah.
I like it. I like it. Tori, what do you think?
Well, in terms of the platform, I'm not that opinionated. But when it comes to team topologies and the thoughts and the methodologies and the common language and that stuff, we are quite a big organization with about 850 in our technology department, and just to get the common understanding of the team types and the interaction types and get the team APIs to function between teams, it takes a long time, and it's a really big organization. So yeah, it's surprising the time it takes to mature in the thoughts, and as you said, what we want to achieve on all levels.
Manu, what's your take here? Because the angle of the question specifically is, that Jason was saying this is probably the biggest pushback on the team topologies concept, is that it isn't efficient in a kind of like a smaller size.
So following up on what Toriel just said, it takes time to get the ideas to spread, and so in my opinion, the earlier you start, the better. And the size of the organization matters only to a certain extent. So even if we're talking at the smallest size, if you have a startup and maybe there are a couple of teams, 10 people, 20 people, in fact, if you look at the behaviors that we talk about, team topologies, if we talk about enabling behaviors, platform, you can apply those even if you don't have dedicated teams. So I think that's where there's sort of a gap sometimes of assuming that we must have platform teams, we must have enabling teams to be able to do these things. At a certain scale, they become necessary, obviously, but at a small scale, your enabling work is basically can be mentoring, can be pairing, where you have someone who is more senior helping someone who is more junior, or even across teams. That's already enabling type of work. So if you get that started early in the organization, then it's going to be easier to translate that to a new operating model where we do have specific enabling teams that are, have now more capacity to help more teams, as Nikki was saying, where you start having kind of economies of scale, if you want to talk in that terms, of having dedicated team to help with X. And sort of similar to platform, where a platform, and Matthew was mentioning the thinnest viable platform, I think, it could be a wiki page where you say we don't have a platform team, but we have some understanding of what works well, what are the AWS services that are probably useful for most teams, how to have a secure configuration that other people can reuse. That alone can be seen as a platform. So we can introduce those behaviors early on and worry about the actual impact on the organizational structures as we grow, if we're scale up, or as the ideas spread across the organization, if like in Toriel's example where they're quite big. And then, yes, at some point you'll be thinking, do we need a platform team? Later on, do we actually need multiple teams inside the platform? Because one of the things in the book that maybe in hindsight we should have made more clear is that obviously if the platform grows, you expect inside the platform, it's not just a bucket of stuff. It's like, okay, now inside the platform we should have a clear idea of what are the value streams, what are the different things of value you provide as a platform, align teams to those. So in a way, you start having stream aligned teams inside the platform, right? And so it's almost like this Russian doll effect, and you have different platforms. You have, maybe the lower level focusing on infrastructure, and then you have other platforms on top that use that and offer something on top. So I think the principles, if you like, and the behaviors that help adopt those principles can be, work at any scale, is the actual more the implementation and the operating model that changes as the scale changes.
And I mean, staying on that for a second, what other things have, emerged since 2019, since you published the book that, you think you either thought, oh man, we should have included that, or hey, we couldn't have known, and maybe they should go into the second edition.
How much time do we have?
We have 2 minutes. And is the second edition coming?
Okay, so there are multiple things, insights and things we realized after the book, which is a good thing. It means the ideas are being applied. We're finding what are challenges, what are the things that maybe were not as clear as we thought. So some of those include what I just mentioned, like it's very quickly you need to start thinking about platform groupings more than platform teams. A platform team is sort of that alias for a stream-aligned team inside the platform. You need to think about, do we need multiple platforms? How do we keep, coherence inside each platform, but make them loosely coupled if they don't need to be coupled, right? Another thing that we notice quite a lot is organizations adopting kind of the building blocks, the types of teams, interaction modes, but they don't spend enough time thinking about their value streams. And so at some point they'll get to some point where they say, well, yes, it's helped us, but now it's still taking quite long to get value to the customer. And that's often that we haven't really figured out what are the real value streams in our organization. And so you cannot align teams to the value streams if you don't know what those really are, right? What else? And I think the third one, and quite important, is what I mentioned earlier, this idea that it's about evolving the organization and sensing when do we need to change something, where, like I was saying, when do we need to have a first platform team, or when do we need to have an enabling team that's dedicated, because this is now a problem that requires a dedicated team to help upskill the organization. It's not just a localized thing anymore. But to do those things and get to those points, you need this sort of muscle, this sort of agility to identify and sense when there are problems that we need to maybe change something in the team structures, or we need to adopt different interactions and expectations and so on.
So is it time for a second edition?
Second edition. I don't know. What we've been talking a lot, me and Matthew, is the fact that a lot of the principles and ideas in Team Topologies apply more broadly outside of technology. We focused on technology because that's our background. We both have software engineering background. And so that's where we saw the ideas work, and in our experience and other people's experience, like Paul's experience and the article he wrote. And so, but a lot of this is applicable outside of technology, both in large organizations that outside the technology department, and even organizations that have nothing to do with software. So we have done a bit of work, for example, with a legal company, a company of lawyers, right, where they wanted to have more cross-functional teams or aligned to their own value streams, meaning different types of laws and different types of cases that they need to try. So that's super interesting for me, because at some point we cannot just improve the flow inside technology. If other parts of the organization don't understand first why flow is important, why do we want to deliver value to customer faster, and secondly, how are we, as, for example, a legal department or a procurement department or what have you, how is the way we work impacting possibly the flow of the actual value to the customer in ways that we don't even realize? So maybe a next book will be more about how do we apply the principles and some of the patterns of Team Topologies outside just technology organizations. But it will take a while still.
Well, and in the meantime, I think you have like a 30K cut that didn't make it into the book that Matthew is talking about in the chat. So maybe we can start sharing that with people. But anyways, we're already over time. So thank you so much, everybody, for making the time. This is really fun, and maybe we get to do it again. And yeah, thank you for your time all, and happy birthday again, Manuel and Matthew.
early birthday.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Was
Thank you,
it was
everyone.
my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Bye bye.